You just couldn't wait, could you? Nope. Okay. So, Thanksgiving Impact. There were a couple positive things that happened this week. They finally got around to announcing some damn pay-per-view matches, and I'll get back to that one in a few minutes. But the other one was Dixie finally showing up and using the law to her advantage. She says that Hogan has been signing some talent contracts, which he doesn't have the power to do for some reason. Not really sure how that works. I mean, if Hogan owns the company now, then he should have the power to sign talent contracts. But the point is, he's been doing some stuff that he doesn't have the right to do, and that's enough for Dixie to get him and Bischoff in front of a judge. Now, this is something that absolutely had to happen in order for this Hogan-Bischoff takeover angle to be taken seriously in any way. At some point, they were going to have to get the law involved because Hogan and Bischoff committed a crime. So to not do this would rob this angle of any kind of realism. So that's a step in the right direction, at least. But there's something that I keep coming back to. Why didn't Dixie just go to her lawyers 2 months ago, show them a tape of the Impact 2 weeks before Bound for Glory and the first one after Bound for Glory, and say to the lawyers, Hogan and Bischoff screwed me out of my company. They tricked me into signing TNA over to them under false pretenses. They committed multi-million-dollar fraud. Here's the video evidence of the fraud being committed. Here's the video evidence of them confessing. I'll call the judge, you call the authorities, get an arrest warrant. I want those two smug motherfuckers thrown in prison. Now, if we were applying real-world logic to this scenario, that's what would have happened. And Dixie and her lawyers have all the evidence they could possibly need, and if she's good friends with a judge like she said, she could probably fast-track this thing to court. Now, I imagine she'd be returned to power in TNA, and if Hogan and Bischoff weren't behind bars already, they'd be well on their way there. Now, I know the wheels of justice move slowly sometimes, but this happened on television. The whole world saw the crime being committed. Now, how exactly the writers can rationalize why none of that ever happened, I don't know. And I'm sure there's some people out there who are going to read me the riot act on this and be like, but Fool Killer, you're thinking too much. You're reading way too much into this. It's pro wrestling. You have to suspend your disbelief. And those people might be right, except for one small problem. This isn't pro wrestling. I said weeks ago that this product had become so story-driven that the wrestling had become virtually meaningless. And honestly, does this show even feel like a pro wrestling show to you anymore? Because it doesn't feel like it to me. I watch Impact, and I don't see a whole lot of meaningful wrestling. But I see corporate backstabbing, shadow politics, industrial espionage, hostile corporate takeovers. These writers clearly don't want Impact to be about wrestling. They want it to be frickin' 24, Law and Order, CSI, so I have to disregard pro wrestling logic and critique it in that sense. And if I'm doing that, I have to ask, is this a well-crafted corporate takeover storyline? No. Is it believable that Hogan and Bischoff are still running TNA and haven't been brought up on charges for the crime they committed on national television? No. Pro wrestling is one thing. You can bend the rules in pro wrestling, but you can't bullshit us about how the justice system works. If you want this to make sense, you have to apply logic and realism to it, and unfortunately, there's very little of that to be found here. Like when Hogan said, hey Dixie, just look at the numbers. You've got to be impressed with those numbers we've been getting, brother. Numbers? You mean that 1.1 rating that Impact got last week? Are those the numbers you're talking about, Hogan? Because that number doesn't mean shit. Impact was doing higher ratings than that long before your ass showed up there. But anyway, enough about that for a while. They finally got around to announcing some pay-per-view matches. Sort of. They never officially ran down the card or anything, but they were mentioning matches in passing throughout the night. If you want to see the whole card, you got to go to the website. Of course, they never told us that. I checked out this card, and holy shit, Russo must have gone to Gimmicks R Us and cleaned the place out. 9 matches, and 6 of them are gimmick matches. How in the blue hell are any of these matches going to feel special when there's so goddamn many of them? In my opinion, 1 gimmick match on a pay-per-view is fine. 2 gimmick matches is pushing it. 3 is too many. You got 6 of them on here. That's excessive even by Russo standards. Now, a couple of them do make sense, I guess. Like Full Metal Mayhem with the guns and Gen Me, that I like. But most of them are completely pointless. Why the hell are Rhino and Rob Van Dam having a First Blood match? They haven't even had a regular match yet. How do you go from nothing to First Blood? For that matter, how the fuck does Rhino get Rob Van Dam on pay-per-view when he just lost to Tommy Dreamer in a 5-minute street fight on Impact? Which leads me to the reason why I'm in black and white right now. Why was this a street fight? I don't know. Why are you putting Tommy Dreamer, of all people, over the guy who's about to face Rob Van Dam on pay-per-view? I don't know! And another thing, why were they calling this the last street fight? Where did that come from? Is TNA retiring the street fight gimmick? Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. Why does TNA push Tommy Dreamer? Does anyone understand this? Look, I respect Tommy. He's a classy guy. He was cool to me when I met him, but why push him? Why? I don't get it. At least with people like Sting and Nash, you could say that they were big stars 15 years ago, but Tommy was never a headliner. He was never a big star. Maybe he was an attraction in ECW, but ECW was never a mainstream company in the first place. And if there was any ECW nostalgia left in the fan community, you pretty much killed that off with Hardcore Justice. Also, I have to mention this again. The Jeff Jarrett thing. The fact that you're pushing Jeff Jarrett this much is baffling to me in itself, but why is Jarrett facing Jesse Neal in an MMA match? Do you remember AJ Styles versus Frank Trigg in a worked MMA fight at No Surrender a few years ago? Do you remember how the fans hated it? Do you remember how they booed? Do you remember how they pissed all over it? Why are you doing this again? So Jarrett is taunting Joe and Angle because they use some MMA submission holds in their movesets. That's one thing. But you don't have to take it this far. You don't have to have Jarrett mock the whole sport just to get heel heat. Like I said last week, it just comes off as TNA looking at the UFC and having penis envy. You don't have to get this fancy with it. Simple is better most of the time. In other words, book them in a regular match, have Jarrett submit Jesse with the rear naked choke, and then afterward he puts Jesse in the ankle lock just to add insult to injury. There comes a point where all these gimmicks become really, really superfluous. And newsflash, Russo, you passed that point a long fucking time ago. And that leads me to final resolution. TNA, do you think all these gimmicks are going to help your buy rates? They're not. Seriously, when has that ever worked for you? When have gimmicks ever equaled pay-per-view buys for your company? Sooner or later, Russo is going to have to own up to this, because the day is going to come when Dixie is going to have to look at the bottom line and face facts that the stuff Russo books is just not working. You can throw all the gimmick matches you want out there. None of it is going to entice people to buy the pay-per-view if the booking still sucks. And I gotta be honest, you guys, this pay-per-view scares the hell out of me. I'm looking at this card, and I'm sure there will be some good to great matches on there, but with all those gimmicks, You've seen what happens to me when TNA does a gimmick match. Do you have any idea what I'm going to have to endure when I review that pay-per-view?